Hello, welcome back to Reads of an Apple. My name is Stacy, and I'm here to talk about the books that I read in March. Now, before we get into like my March specific stats, I did have two different reading challenges, I guess, that ended at the end of March. So I just wanted to kind of touch base on those. The first one I was doing was the New to You Author Challenge. That was January, February, and March of 2023, and this is hosted by Bookcase and Coffee, and the goal was to read at least 2 new to you authors a month, and then you could submit for prizes. So in January I read 7, in February I read 4, and in March I read 6. So I got quite a few new to me authors done in Q1 of 2023, which is great. And we'll see. Maybe I win one of the prizes they're going to give away. The other one I was participating in was the Read What You Own challenge that was hosted by Izzy from Happy for Now, and then Shay from Shay Geeks Out. And I didn't use all of their templates. They had a lot of different ones, but I just kind of did a simple one for me that had my goals and what I read. So this was also January, February, and March. So my goal was 5 books that I physically owned, 10 books on Hoopla, 3 books on Libby, 5 books that I had digitally owned, and 10 books off of KU for a total of 33. That was my goal. I ended up reading 9 that I physically owned, 15 off of Hoopla, 7 off of Libby, 2 that I digitally owned, and 16 off of KU for a total of 49. So I beat my goal. The only one that I didn't quite hit is my specifically digitally owned, but that's fine. Those ones I feel like aren't as quite of as big of a deal as me, but I definitely wanted to utilize more of my subscription services, so KU, Hoopla, and Libby, and my goal was 5 physically owned books, so I'm glad that I almost doubled that. So those are just my little kind of stats there for those 2 reading challenges. Now, moving on, we'll go over my stats for the month of March, and then we'll get into the specific books that I've read. So for March, I read 22 books for a grand total of 7,864 pages. I averaged 2.32 days to read a book. The average page count of everything was about 357.45 pages, which does seem fairly normal, 350 range. As for my page breakdowns, I read 1 book under 100 pages, 2 in the 100s, 4 in the 200s, 7 in the 300s, 5 in the 400s, 1 in the 500s, 1 in the 600s, and 1 in the 800s. And then, like I mentioned earlier, I read 6 new authors, and I didn't have any rereads. I still have no rereads for the year of 2023, even though I have a lot of series that I want and a lot of books I've been wanting to reread. I still haven't reread anything, but we will move on. So my stat board number 2 is I read 8 of these books for clubs, readathons, or read-alongs. 4 of my books ended up having diversity, so a little worse than I typically do diversity-wise. I read 1 standalone. And this is kind of interesting to me just to see how many series books I've read. So it's still kind of like most of the books I read are in a series. 3 of the books were recommended to me, so I did a lot of my own kind of searching out this month for sure. 4 of these books I had owned in paperback. 1 of them I had ordered. And then I added 11 books to my wish list. As for how I read them, I read 3 books physically, 10 books via ebook, 8 audiobooks, and then I had 1 combo. I listened to the audiobook while I read the physical book. Okay, and then as for kind of publishing is where I'm going to go next. I read 17 independently published books. I read 1 book from a small publisher, and I read 4 books that were traditionally published. And this is a very heavy 2020 decade month. I only read 3 books that were published in the 2010s, and the rest, the other 19, were all published in the 2020s, which is crazy. Usually I have an early, like 2000s to 2009 book, but not this month. And then as for ages, I read 1 YA, 2 new adults, 11 of the books, 20s were kind of the main age group, 30s I read 2, and then I read 4 books with supernatural characters or immortal characters or whatever you want to call them. As for where the books were located, I had 4 of these physically owned. One of them I digitally owned. 10 of the books were in KU, 7 of the books were from Hoopla, and 1 was from Libby. As for my ratings, my average rating for the month was 4.30. I had 8 5 stars, 5 4.5 stars, 5 4 stars, 2 3.5 star, 1 3 star, and 1 2 star. And then as for genres, I had 7 contemporary romances, 6 fantasy romances, 3 historical romances, 2 paranormal romances, and 4 sci-fi romances. And then for my contemporary breakdown, I had 3 small towns, 1 sports, and 3 just normal contemporaries. And that's it for my stats. So, quick little run through. I know that was a lot at you, but I find them very interesting, and I want to try to do at some point. I started keeping a more detailed spreadsheet. It's obviously gotten more elaborate and stuff in 2021. So I have 2021, 2022, and 2023. And then I actually went back into my Goodreads, and this one I had to be more basic kind of information because I didn't go through book by book, but I have gone through my Goodreads and pulled all the books that I had marked as read in 2020. So I don't know if my days will be quite exact as to how they were, because I wasn't as anal about making sure that the day I said I finished it was the day that it's marked as finished on Goodreads, kind of a situation. But I did kind of do just a quick pull all that information, and at some point I'm hoping to kind of do a comparison to see my growth. I was thinking 5 years, so we still have a couple years going, but maybe I'll do a few years or something like that. But I don't know. I find stats like that interesting, and it'll be even more interesting, I think, to track how my reading changes and evolves over time, especially when you can look at it at like a 5-year comparison. But anyway, I'll stop rambling about that because we have 22 books to talk about. So let's just jump into it. The first book I read in March was Last Sacrifice by Richelle Mead. This is the final book in her Vampire Academy series. I read this for the Vampire Academy read-along. The final live show was supposed to be at the end of February, but then it got postponed. And I haven't seen anything about when it's supposed to be rescheduled, so I don't know when that's going to happen, but I did finally finish the book. I gave it 4 stars. Overall, I have to say, I was a lot more interested and intrigued by Lissa and Christian's story than Rose's story, which isn't probably the best thing because Rose was our like main character for the series, but or at least our like number 1 main character. I don't know. She kind of was a roller coaster for me, and if I liked her, if I didn't like her, if I thought she was making silly decisions. There was a couple books where it felt like her character was making choices that didn't fit the way her character had been established in previous books. I thought it was kind of interesting how it ended. I wasn't a big fan of the whole Adrian situation, especially in the last book, and how she ends up cheating on him with Dimitri. I don't know. So I had a lot of kind of issues with her and Dimitri and Adrian and that whole situation. But I really enjoyed Lissa's part. I really enjoyed Lissa. So yeah, at some point maybe I'll pick up the spin-off series Bloodlines, I think, but it's not at the top of my list right now. But I'm sure, but if they decide to read that as part of the read along to read the spin-off series as well, I'll definitely want to try to participate in that as well. And then very quickly, we jumped into the Romance Takeover Readathon. Now, I'm just going to briefly touch base on the books I read through that. If you'd like to see my more in-depth thoughts, I did vlog during the Takeover Romance Takeover Readathon. I'll link it up there for you. So the first book I read was Song of the Forever Rains. This is the first book in E.J. Mellow's Musai series. And hold that thought. I have the paperback of it now. I listened to this via audiobook, and then I saw the paperback was on sale, so I bought the paperback. So I was like, I was like, wait a second, I own this. I can be holding this book. I gave it 5 stars. I've really enjoyed it. I think it has an absolutely gorgeous cover. And that's kind of weird. You'll see my stack here later. Yeah, I definitely want to read more in this trilogy. I plan on picking up the second book this month in the month of April if I can. But yeah, 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. Then I picked up a book that I've been saying I've been meaning to read since it came out, I think in September of last year, but I finally got to it, and that is The Ugly Stepsister by Megan Van Dyke, the second book in her reimagined fairy tale series. This is a Cinderella-ish retelling, but the main heroine is Anna, who is one of Cinderella's stepsisters, and I give it 5 stars. I loved it to pieces. I'm a big fan of Megan Van Dyke. I can't wait for the third book to come out at the end of April, which is The Alice Curse. So yeah, 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. And I'm very sad that I dropped it and creased the front cover. Especially because this is my signed copy. But it just means it was well loved, right? Then the third book I read for the Romance Takeover Readathon was How to Marry a Marble Marquis by CM Nascosta. This was the first time I've read her. I give this 4 stars. This is one of the books in the multi-author Monster Ball series. This was Eleanor and Silas. And yeah, it was fine. I enjoyed it. Definitely intrigued to see more from CM Nascosta, and I'm very intrigued by some of the other books in this series too, because the fantasy historical Regency romance mashup was definitely very intriguing. Then I picked up Broken by the Horde King. This is book 4 in the Horde Kings of Drakkar series, and I mean, 5 stars. Are we surprised? I love the series. I love Zoey Draven. I've talked about it a lot before, but I read the first 2 books when they first came out. And then the third book wasn't out yet. And I just never went back to the series. Don't know why, because I love the first 2 books. And then finally I was like, it's time to finish the series. I don't know what I'm doing. Oh, I read, the trigger for me to go back to Zoey Draven was I read her new book. The first book in her Brides of the Kylor series, and I was like, I never finished Hordes of Drakkar. What am I doing? So I picked up the third book, and then I ended up picking up this book randomly. It wasn't on my TBR for the readathon. I think this is the one that I was at a vet appointment, and I needed something on my Kindle, and nothing on my TBR was on my Kindle. The rest was either audiobook or physical books that I needed to read. So I went with that, and 5 stars. I loved it. Then I picked up The Basilisk of Star Manor by Kathryn Moon. This is a novella in her Tempting Monsters series. So this is considered book 1.5. I gave this 4 stars. I was definitely intrigued to read this because I did read the first book. The Lady of Rooksgrave Manor, I think. And I'm not a reverse harem, why choose, whatever you want to call it, romance. The entire time I was rooting for one person, and I'm not into it. I just can't. But this is a two people, two creatures, two beings relationship. So I was intrigued to read it to see how Kathryn Moon would kind of deal with a two creature situation. So I think if she has other books that are only just one partner situation, I'm definitely intrigued to read them because I enjoy the like world building. I just can't handle. I mean, I struggle with menages and poly as it is, but the reverse harem situation, I'm just like, oh, it doesn't make sense to me. It just doesn't. I don't like it. But anyway, I gave this 4 stars. I enjoyed it. I feel like world building wise, I liked that aspect of it less than Lady of Rooksgrave Manor, but I liked the relationship more than the Lady of Rooksgrave Manor. But at the same time, it didn't quite give me everything I wanted. But like I said, you can check out my vlog and get my full thoughts on it. And then the final book I read for the readathon was Jen's, one of her top books, The Takeover. This is the second book of the Miles High Club. And I gave it 4.5 stars. It wasn't quite a 5-star for me. Maybe I was just a little too critical with it because I know it is a favorite of a lot of people, but more specifically Jen. But there were a couple little things that just really, really bothered me. That you'll notice one of them happens fairly early on in the book, and I just could not get over it. So yeah, that was everything for the Romance Takeover Readathon, and that put me at 7 books within like the first week of March, which was a great start of the month. Then I kind of had a lot of free read time for most of the rest of the month, so I just kind of went hog wild, and all I really wanted to read was more Zoey Draven. So the 8th book I picked up was Taken by the Horde King. This is the 5th book in Hordes of Dakar, and I mean 5 stars. I loved it. This was dealing with the Red Mist kind of situation and learning about the Red Mist. And we get a Horde King captured by humans, and then he ends up capturing a human woman, and I just love this series so much. And this was Mina and Rune, and it's just, this one was really fun. This one was a little more angsty because we had the kind of simultaneously him kidnapping her was more of an angsty situation because she was kind of hurt by the way that he was making it out to be, when she was kind of what led to him being captured, but she didn't really want to do it. She was kind of forced into the situation, and I just loved them to pieces. And then I was like, do I want to read something else? Kind of. But do I just want to finish the series because I have 1 book left? Yes. I picked up book 6, Throne of the Horde King, finished it out. I think this is probably my least favorite of the romance aspect, but I thought this was a great end to the series. I mean, we got dealing with the Red Mist, we got dealing with the King in Dulcich City. And this is Kara and Arik, and Kara is the rumored legendary, like, she's like rumors and legend and who knows if it's true or not, but she was like the first Dakari and human, like, oh my gosh, biracial person, and she ends up having a romance with the bastard son of the king of Dulcich, and he is just trying to return Dakar to its former glory, because the planet's like struggling for sure. That's what this red mist was kind of doing, is it was kind of the planet being like, hey, you're destroying us. So yeah, so I know Zoey Draven right now is writing the Brides of the Kylor series, but there is a note at the end of this book that she has ideas for a spin-off series. I'm very much hoping that it is dealing with the kill-up, because I'm very intrigued by the kill-up situation that's happening, and I definitely, at least if it's just one book, I just want one kill-up romance because they are so interesting. So yeah, I finished that series and was kind of at a loss at what to do with my life next, but I ended up caving in. I got it as a recommendation for a very specific romanceopoly prompt, which was a fantasy book that doesn't have magic, and it took me forever to find it, and I was kind of pointed in the direction of this book, and I had said I wasn't really intrigued by it because I grew up kind of around cow situations, but I just went for it. And so I read Morning Glory Milking Farm, which is the first book in her Monster Bait series. And I have to say, I understand the hype of this. I did not picture him as a Minotaur or as a very cow-heavy Minotaur. So I did not picture him like this at all. He was a little more humanized, maybe more alien-esque than Minotaur, but I definitely understand him being a cinnamon roll and just their relationship. It was very just like sweet and cozy. I mean, it was steamy, but I just enjoyed it overall. And then there was a little bit with how much seed he has, where I was like, that's a little much, but especially when they finally go all the way together. But I mean, I gave it 4 stars. I thought it was super sweet, and I totally get the hype. So yeah, I read that. Then I picked up the audiobook for 10 Trends to Seduce Your Best Friend by Penny Reid, and this is Winnie and Byron's book. This is a standalone book from her. And I gave it 4 stars. This is STEM related. We've got fake dating, mutual pining. Byron has a social disorder. And, you know, I really enjoyed it. It didn't quite hit all the notes that I like from a Penny Reid, but I mean, it was very STEM focused, and I just really liked overall the way that their romance progressed. I just wanted it to be a little quicker because they're both virgins. They're both older virgins, and we literally don't get them finally going all the way until the epilogue. Like, come on, Penny. I have read, like, she usually has her steam a lot earlier than that. But I kind of understand why it was in this situation. But there was just so many almost moments in this book that I just was like, come on, just get it over with. It's not that big of a deal. Let's just move on. I didn't like how big of a deal it was made in the way it was, if that makes sense. But then I picked up Hating the Player by Rebecca Jenshak, finally. This is the second book in her Campus Wallflowers series. I wanted to get this read. I had a romanceopoly prompt that led me to it, but the third book is coming out in a couple months, so I definitely wanted to get caught up, and I loved it. 4.5 stars. I really enjoy it. Especially this series, I find it's a little kind of predictable in what's going to happen, but it's just so well done that even though it's predictable, it just feels good and it feels cozy, and it's that extra, like we all know, it's a romance, will have a happy ending, but there's that extra layer of comfort, I feel like, in it being predictable, and that's not in a bad way. Like, I don't, it's just like, you know what's coming, and so you can just be happy that you know what's coming. I don't know if this makes sense, but I loved it. This is Violet and Gavin's book. I'm very excited to see what's coming for Dahlia and Felix in book 3. So yeah, another great book from Rebecca Jenshak, and she's definitely an author I want to get through her backlist for. So yeah, we will move on. Then I picked up the book for the Ilona Andrews read-along. We are currently in the Innkeeper Chronicles series, and the book for March was One Fell Sweep, which is book 3 in the series. Oh my gosh. So much happened in this book. We get to finally meet Maud, which is Dina's sister. We get dealing with Arland again, and Maud and Arland's gonna have a relationship that's being set up for the next book, which is book 4, which I'm very excited for. Sean is like back in Dina's life, so we really get the solidification of their romance and them just being together. And so that was beautiful. This book made me laugh. I mean, I think this is their Ilona Andrews' funniest series. They just do such a great job at the humor. This book made me cry multiple times, and also like yelling. It was the end of this book just gets you, because Dina kind of goes into a fugue state. This was my combo book. I read this while listening to the graphic audio. And not that the previous graphic audios I've read were bad, but you can tell specifically with this book, I feel this is one of their newer releases. The production value is just so well done and on a higher tier than the other ones. And it just, I don't know if it's just advancing technology or more money because they're doing more books and more people are talking about them, or what the situation is. But when she's in this fugue state, like the last little bit of this book is like everything that wasn't coming from Dina's POV, that was like side characters or stuff in the background, was like muffled. And it was so amazing. And I cannot highly recommend, if you see a book that you love or a book you want to read is available in graphic audio, I really recommend picking up the graphic audio. A lot of them are available in Hoopla. So 5 stars. I love this to pieces. The situation in this one is there's a alien race called the Hiru, and Dina is kind of giving them sanctuary-ish. And there is a religious-based alien race that their basically entire life goal is to destroy the Hiru for religious reasons. And so these people are basically just assaulting the inn this entire book. And it was amazing. And I love it. And are we surprised? Not at all. Then I picked up Earls Prize Curves by Jemma Frost. This is the first book in her Lord's Love Curve series. I give this 3 stars. It was fine. This is a historical romance, super age gap. Lady is almost becoming a spinster. Well, I guess she won't become a spinster because her family is older when she was older when she was born. And of course they had a girl, but they're like, that's okay. She can take care of us as we're getting older. And she's going to be forced to marry like her father's friend who's like 70 years old. So she's going to be, and he's like their next door neighbor. So she will spend the rest of her life taking care of these 3 elderly people. And she is at her friend's house one day. They're twins, and she has a risque book, and their father comes in, and yeah, it's between her and her friend's father, and they go off and have like a week-long affair in his country estate, in his like hunting house or something. So it's even less like nobody knows that they're there situation. And yeah, I gave it 3 stars. It was fine. It just didn't quite give me what I want from a historical romance or from a novella. Then I picked up the audiobook for The Bookworm's Guide to Dating by Emma Hart. This is the first book in her Bookworm's Guide. Emma Hart before this was like, I had some books that I really loved from her, and then I had some books that I did not like at all. This was 4.5 stars. I loved it. This is like bookish people representation done to the nth degree. The series is based about 3 friends who own a bookshop together, and this is Kinsley's book. She is it's her birthday and she decides to start dating again, but she's just so introverted and awkward around people that she really struggles to have successful dates. And so she ends up having her brother's best friend offers to kind of help teach her how to date, and it is their romance, and it was just so much fun. I loved it. I thought the humor hit me well in this book, and I just loved all of the little nods that like readers, I don't know, it just felt like I could see myself and my bookish friends in this world having these same conversations. It just was representative of, even more specifically, romance readers so well. I loved it. It was so much fun. Then I picked up another kind of bookish book, Talk Wordy to Me by Frankie Love with Caitlin Evans. This is a novella series by Frankie Love, and this is the first book in his Curvy Librarian series, and I gave it 2 stars. I did not like this book. I thought the bookish person representation was absolutely horrendous, and it was even more apparent after reading the Bookworm's Guide to Dating. Our main heroine in here is a librarian, and her mother is a romance author. But then they're talking about how Nicholas Sparks writes the best romance books, and I'm like, he's not romance. He himself says it's not romance. I'm getting all heated thinking about it now. And it was just, I just didn't enjoy it. And she meets she does like senior stuff at the library, and one of the members of this book club is just trying to set her up with his grandson. She ends up caving and going on the date with the grandson. And it's just, they decide that they don't want to date. They're both not looking for a relationship right now, but they're attracted to each other, I guess. And he takes her back to his house, and he takes her virginity in his hot tub, which was kind of a really weird situation. And then the way that it turns into love, it just was too much. It's not outside of me being angry about the way books and romance were talked about in this book. I didn't like the pacing or the setup, or I just didn't enjoy their romance at all. It didn't feel like it was romantic at all. I did not feel the love at all. It definitely was a physical based feeling. And then throw on top of that all of the hate or the wrong representation, I guess. I don't know. Maybe representation isn't quite the right word either, but just the incorrectness of romance books and the hate that this librarian who loves books and whose mother is a famous romance author had against romance books. I couldn't take it. So after listening to that audiobook, I went back to good book representation and picked up the second book in the Bookworm's Guide, which is the Bookworm's Guide to Faking It. This is Holly and Sebastian's book. This is a second chance romance. And this is Holly and Sebastian. Sebastian is a baseball player, but him and Holly were like best friends growing up. And when it was at prom, and he's going off to do baseball, so he's going to be leaving their small town. He at prom was he planned on kissing Holly. Holly was planning on letting him know that she was like in love with him and not just in a friendly way. And she walks in on him making out with like her number one, like the person that bullied her all through their schooling. And she just kind of cuts him off because she's so hurt from that. He comes back years later because he's been injured, so he has to do like rehab and surgery and things before he can kind of get back in place. And they reconnect and they kind of work through their things, and he somehow convinces her to be his fake girlfriend at his sister's wedding. And I don't know, I loved it. I gave this one 4.5 stars as well. Then I picked up one of my most anticipated releases for 2023, Never Seduce a Duke by Vivienne Lorret. I finally picked it up. I was edging myself for like a month on picking this up, but I finally picked it up. 5 stars. This is kind of King Arthur retelling-ish. I mean, this is Meg's book. This is the final book in this series, and I loved it. I loved it. We get, the first half is kind of like a road trip romance, and then we have a surprise pregnancy, which is kind of a spoiler, but it's spoiled to us at the end of the previous book, so I'm just gonna throw it out there. And then it's 2 years later, she's had the baby, and they kind of reconnect. And so set up for this is, the heroine's aunts that we meet in book 3, they're kind of like the 2 matrons that look over all of the group of the girls. They're going on holiday to the continent, and Meg goes with them after her heart is broken by someone who she thought was her, like, soulmate. And on their way out of England, they stop at, his name is Lucian's, but he's the Duke of Merleton, and there is this rumored King Arthurian recipe book that they want to steal a recipe for. If you've read the other books, you know that they collect all of the best recipes that they can, and they're known for having like the best palates and throwing the best wedding feasts and things like that. So they want to steal one of his recipes out of this book. And while they're there, they kind of get in a weird situation where Meg ends up being kind of left alone in like their under tunnels of this keep, and runs into the Duke Lucian, and they have this little connection going. And then we find out that the book was stolen, and he thinks it was Meg, and that she is this Lady Avalon who's known to be a seducer and stealing all these different things from different people of the pier. And it basically chases her down throughout the continent, and he's trying to seduce her because she's known as the seducer. And poor little Meg is just like, I've never had somebody think that I was like a seducer before, and no one has ever, everyone kind of still treats me like a little girl because she has very much of a baby face. And he's like the first person who's seen her as a woman. And so she doesn't like come out and say that she's not Lady Avalon, but she intimates that she might be, but in a way that he still could think maybe she still is, because she likes the way that he makes her feel when he talks to her. And it's their romance that I loved it. I thought it was a great, I loved the epilogue or the last chapter. I don't even remember what it was. And we get all of everybody together with their husbands, and it was so much fun. And I feel like it was kind of different than the previous books, but I love Vivienne Lorret. She's one of my favorite modern historical romance authors, and I loved it to pieces. And as you can see, I did get the pre-order stuff, so I have the bookmark, and I also got a signed book plate that I put in it, and I'm very excited. And there is a little hint, and I knew this going in, so when I saw it mentioned, but her next book is coming out in December of this year, and it's gonna be the first book in the Liars Club, and I cannot wait. And I don't know the blurb or anything like that, but the cover has been released, and it's a gorgeous pink. But yeah, 5 stars. Okay, we're getting through there. Then gotta switch pages here on my little notes. I picked up the audiobook for the Bookworm's Guide to Flirting. This is the final book in the trilogy. This is Sailor's book. And this is a roommates to lovers situation. It's Sailor and Dylan. Dylan is like the physical therapist, trainer person that is working with Sebastian from book 2. He's British, and he needs a place to stay, and Sailor needs a roommate because her landlord has raised the price on her rent. And this one definitely had a lot more push and pull between them, and because they were friends and it was a really good roommate situation, so neither of them wanted to cross that bridge and potentially have things implode because they were friends and a part of the same friend group, and they were good roommates with each other. So but they finally got there. I gave it 4.5 stars. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed this whole trilogy. I didn't really mention it too much, but there is a whole cast of their grandparents in this nursing home throughout the series, and then in the first book they get ducks, and it is this whole like background thing going on is what's going on at the nursing home with these ducks, and it just cracks me up so much. I will say, the first book is like 300 and something pages. The second book's like 250, and this one's like 212. So you could definitely tell that the second two books were shorter and not quite as much. I think the first book is definitely my favorite, but probably because it was longer, so we got more emotional growth and depth there. But I enjoyed this full series. All of them I had to give 4.5 stars because I just loved them to pieces. And then I picked up the final book for our SJM along, House of Sky and Breath. I mean, 5 stars. I don't even know where to start with this book. It was amazing. It has so much in it, and I really kind of struggled with some of the rebel situation. I talked about this in my latest weekly vlog where I read this book, but the biggest detractor for me for this book was the whole rebel situation. I myself would have preferred, instead of Bryce and Hunt and everybody teaming up with the rebels, that they were doing their own stuff to kind of figure out what's going on with the Asteri, and then at certain points have their paths coincide with what the rebels are doing. But I don't know, we get so many more POVs in here, and I am agog at what's going to happen in book 3, and I can't wait till the end of January 2024 to see what happens next. But I am 100% fully on the hype train. Thank you so much to Jen to creating this read along, and I am fully on the SJM hype train. And I know I just said that, but my mind is blown about how good these books are, and I totally understand the hype for them, and I can't wait to read more from Miss Sarah J. Maas. I love it. I love it. It's just so good. Okay. Okay, so just 2 more books left. So the 21st book I picked up was the audiobook for The Spinster and the Rake by Eva Devon. This is the first book in her Never a Wallflower series, and I give this book 3.5 stars. I enjoyed it. This is the first book that I've read by Eva Devon, and it was fine. I enjoyed some of it. So this is Georgiana and Edward, and Georgiana is from they're not in the peerage, but they are like a gentle family, or a genteel family, and they're at a house party that Edward the Duke's grim aunt is hosting, and they're really there. Her family's really there. They were surprised they were kind of invited, but they're really there for her older sister to have a chance to find a husband. And Georgiana just doesn't deal with people. She's very much an introvert. She just wants to hang out in the library. She just doesn't want to deal with anybody in society. And she stumbles across a library with a very comfortable chair. And while she's in there, Edward comes in after a little escapade that happens, and there was a situation where he had to change pants because he ripped his pants. So he's wearing one of the stable boys' pants. And Georgiana kind of is like, you don't look like the Duke. You don't look like the owner of this chair. And they have some banter, and then he kisses her. And then his aunt walks in. And it's just like, she's so happy that she can marry him off type of situation. So she's just like, oh my God, you were caught. And of course he assumes that Georgiana planned this was a trick him into marriage type of situation. That portion didn't last very long, which I was grateful for, because he very quickly realized that she eschews society and the ton as much as he does. He seems to be somewhere on the autism spectrum, or neurodiverse spectrum, something like that. Obviously this is a historical romance, so we don't get into like any like diagnosis or anything like that, but he's very clearly a person that has some sensory issues, or both dislikes certain sensory things, but it also uses some sensory things to help calm him and reset him. Yeah, and it's their romance. What I didn't like is, I don't know, my biggest thing, I think, was him not trying to explain to her more that he does have, I don't know, this handicap in a way, and it takes way too long to have the conversation where he's like, this is just who I am. I get something in my head, I get this thing of this is what I need to do next, and I cannot do anything else until I get what is next on my like mental to-do list done. And so there's a lot of like miscommunication situations that I just wasn't a big fan of, that took way too long to get resolved. And I just wish they would have had that conversation a little bit quicker, and I also was kind of hoping, because like opening chapter, they're getting married, and they still didn't get married until like 50% of the way in. So I was kind of hoping we would get, them married a little bit quicker than what they did. Although then we have their secret wedding and they got married sooner, and let's be honest, it's written in a way that he didn't like, oh, I just couldn't deal with the people and the pomp and circumstance. I want our wedding to just be between us. But let's be honest, the reason why he asked her is because they were in the heat of the moment and he really wanted to sleep with her. And I don't care how many flowery words you use to make it seem like that wasn't the impetus for them getting secretly married so they can, consummate the marriage. That is what it felt like to me. And so that was also a little disappointing. And then the last book I read was The Vampire's Mail Order Bride by Kristen Painter. This is the first book in her Nocturne Falls series. And I gave it 3.5 stars. This is Fade to Black, Closed Door. Did not know that going in. It's fine that it is. I can enjoy those types of romances, but I just wish I would have known that going in. But it was kind of what I was expecting. A cozy paranormal romance, set in like a paranormal based town where they can all kind of pretend to be themselves situation. And I thought it was super cute. I thought it was super fun. I did have some situations mostly with our hero, who is Hugh, who was the vampire, and how wishy-washy he was and how much emotional turmoil he went through, and how he very quickly reverse a decision or want to take it to the nth extreme or something like that. So that was kind of where it fell flat for me, as well as the whole mafia plotline, which I think is just going to be this specific book. But in it, our heroine Delaney is working at a restaurant in Brooklyn, and late night after work has to come back. She left her apron and tips there. So she goes back to get her stuff because she knows the boss is still there with his weekly poker night game or whatever, and actually finds out that he's a part of the mafia and shoots some guy that she somehow decides to film on her phone, and ends up stumbling across Eternimate, which is a service that finds, I guess, matchmaking for supernaturals. And she kind of takes the position of a lady that was going to be matched with Hugh, And so she finagles a way that she is now Annabelle, and she pretends to be Annabelle when she's there to kind of lay low for a little bit and figure out what she's going to do next with her life. Very quickly that is like resolved. There is some drama with one of his exes that I wasn't very fond of, but overall I enjoyed this. I did round it up to 4 stars on Goodreads, but 3.5 stars is where I'm sitting. But I'm intrigued to read more in this series without some of this extra plot stuff that was going on, and kind of stay in the little town and see how that goes. But I enjoyed it. And that's it. That's the 22 books that I read in the month of March. So let me know what your favorite book in March was, or if you're interested in any of these, I'd love to know. Or if you have any recommendations for me based on the books that I read and loved, that would also be greatly appreciated. If you'd rather just leave me an emoji, why don't you leave me a vampire emoji for the last book I read for the month? But otherwise, don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't, and I will see you all soon with another video.